Welcome, everybody. We're starting today with two stories that are going to upset a bunch of people in my audience, and that's okay. One is about Jordan Peterson, which we will get to. The first is about Whoopi Goldberg. Many of you wrote to me about Whoopi Goldberg's statements on The View, where she is one of a number of co-hosts, about the Holocaust and race and Jewish people. And as I was preparing a story about this, news broke that Whoopi Goldberg indeed has now been suspended for 2 weeks by The View because of her comments about the Holocaust. Now, I'm just going to give you my interpretation of what she said, and I'm going to explain to you why what she said is so problematic. And what the main thrust of what Whoopi said on The View is that the Holocaust is not about race, or was not about race. And there's really 2 or 3 different layers of confusion here, which I'm going to try to pick apart. And there's a ton of people who still don't understand the concept of Judaism as a race, saying, well, hold on, but Judaism's a religion. It's not really a race. And the part that makes this segment difficult is that, unfortunately, I mean, listen, I expect out and out anti-Semitism from the right. I get it all the time. Soros funds you, go back to Israel, a place I've been once and have no real connection to. All these different things. I expect that from the right. But on the left, there's a different thing that goes on. And we saw it with the Women's March, where, for example, the Women's March from several years ago now, leadership didn't want Jewish women involved on the board because Jewish women were seen as privileged whites rather than a historically discriminated minority group. And inbuilt in that are all sorts of biases and prejudices that only reinforce anti-Semitic tropes. And so the left has a problem with this too. I don't care if you don't like hearing that. I'm going to call it out on both sides. So let's just jump into the clip. And I'm going to try, rather than pre-explain, let's just look at this piece by piece. Okay, let's take a look.
Well, also, if you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race.
It's about a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy. It's about
it's not about
ideal race.
But these are two white groups of people.
Well, how do we have to black people
see them as white people?
But you're missing the point. You're missing the point. The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley. Let's talk about it for what it is. It's how people treat each other. It's a problem. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, because black, white, Jews.
And of course, it does matter if the people carrying out the Holocaust believe they're doing it along racial lines because they see Jews as a different race, which we will get to.
It's how everybody eats each other. So is it, if you're uncomfortable, if you hear about mouse, should you be worried? Should your child say, oh, my God,
Okay. And then in another clip, again, she says, the Holocaust is white people doing stuff to white people.
And a Tennessee school pulled the graphic novel Mouse out of their lessons on the Holocaust because it contained some nudity and some bad language. Personally, I'm shocked because, given the story of Mouse, I'm surprised that that's what made you uncomfortable, the fact that there was some nudity. And I mean, it's about the Holocaust, the killing of 6 million people, but that didn't bother you. But the naked
I'm not sure that they don't use the naked part as a kind of a canard to throw you off from the fact that they don't like history that makes white people look bad.
Well, this is white people doing it to white people.
Yeah.
So there is that same idea, white people doing it to white people. So here's the thing. First of all, there's this really funny thing when it comes to Judaism, where you've got the anti-Semitic right and white nationalists who say Jews are not white. Jews are a different race. I've had Richard Spencer, the white nationalist, tell me Jews are not European. They're not what he is, right? Jews definitely are not white. Among some on the left, you have the view that Jews are white with the white privilege that comes with being white. Jews are not minorities. They're just privileged white people. And of course, this is where the concept of white passing comes up. And the truth is that while Ashkenazi Jews are absolutely white passing, There's lots of other Jews, Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews who are not white passing, but that's not even really what this is about. There's not one right answer, but there kind of is. If you take the view that we're all one race, there is no race, right? Like that's a view that some people take now. There's academic circles where we're all just the human race. Okay. If that's the case, then this is all meaningless, right? Like if the view we're taking is race is not a thing, ethnicity is not a thing, then there's no black people and there's no white people and there's fine. If we accept that there are racial and ethnic groups, okay, right? So like if that's a conversation, if we want to talk about humans in that context, Jews are an ethnic group. When I do my ancestry or 23andMe or whatever, it says, oh, your ethnicity is 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. If I convert to Christianity religiously, I'm still 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. And the origin of this confusion is that Jews are an ethno-religious group. Now, sometimes people like to say that's a special pleading. There's no other ethno-religious group. It's made up. No, actually, there's tons of ethno-religious groups. You're just not familiar with them. The Copts in Egypt are an ethno-religious group. The Yazidi people of Iraq are an ethno-religious group, which means what? Yazidi Iraqis are an ethnic group. And I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Yazidism or Yazidism is also a religion. You can quit being a religious Yazidi. You would still be ethnically Yazidi. You might not have heard of that. And so sometimes people say, no, this is something that's it only exists with Jews. It doesn't. That's not true. Separately, there are also sort of bad faith people who pretend not to understand this, who just like to attack Jews as privileged and not worthy of our consideration, despite being at the top. When you look at religiously based hate crimes in the United States, Jews are always either at the top or almost there in terms of being the victims of religiously oriented hate crimes. And sometimes the perceived whiteness of Ashkenazi Jews is used as a means to write off anti-Semitism. And it was very ugly. It was done in a very ugly way with the Women's March of a couple years ago. So that is Whoopi Goldberg is just wrong. Now, in terms of her being suspended, I just don't know. With all of these every time we talk about suspensions, I have no idea what's appropriate or what's not. What I want to also mention is the suspension of Whoopi Goldberg is furthering anti-Semitic tropes, and you can probably imagine why. Whoopi Goldberg suspended for her comments about the Holocaust is proof to those who want to talk about Jewish control of media to say the Jews got her. The Jews who control Hollywood and control The View, they got Whoopi Goldberg. And it just so I'm not saying the suspension is or isn't appropriate, but for people who want, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so many of the same people who liked Whoopi's comments are now saying her suspension is proof of that conspiracy of Jews to control Hollywood, which we've talked about many times before. So another one of these ugly incidents, and I'm curious to hear what you think about it. All right, let's go on to the next segment, which is going to anger many people in my audience. I got a ton of it. So let me back up. Last week, we looked at this interview that Jordan Peterson did with Joe Rogan. And the interview was just word salad after word salad of meaningless stuff. And predictably, I got a lot of emails from people saying, David, you might not have understood what Jordan Peterson was saying, but it made a lot of sense. In particular, his rant about the Bible. And unfortunately, you're wrong. What Jordan Peterson said about the Bible did not make a lot of sense. And so we're going to go through now. We did an overview of the interview last week. Now we're going to focus in specifically on Jordan Peterson's rant about the Bible, which makes no sense. And there's a really good, there's this subreddit called Ask a Historian. Some people would say Ask an Historian. That's a grammatical preference. And I'm going to summarize some of the comments here. The Reddit user who wrote this out is Kiwi Hellenist, who's an expert in early Greek literature. So let's go through the video. And we are now going to really focus in on the substance. It is an unintelligible word salad, and it's also wrong on the substance. So let's just jump right in.
So I just walked through the Museum of the Bible in Washington. That was very cool. It's a very cool museum.
So the structure, that's what the Bible
it's what
provides.
I figured out. I just figured this out this week. So it was a cool thing to walk through because it's chronological. They have one floor, which is the history of the Bible. But it's not exactly that. It's really what it is the history of the book.
Right.
Now, in many ways, the first book was the Bible.
Okay. In many ways, the first book was the Bible. Now, what does he mean by that? He says he's talking about the history of the book, not the content. Okay. So if that's what he means, the first book was not the Bible. Books date back to the start of the second millennium BC. The Bible dates to no earlier than the 7th century BC, or BCE, as is now often said. Some of it came much later than that even, and the New Testament is even newer. So, okay, first statement, the first book was not the Bible. It's a factually incorrect statement.
I mean, literally, because at one point there was only one book.
Okay. I mean, literally, it was the first book because at one point there was only one book. At one point, I guess there was only one book, but it wasn't the Bible. The Bible was not that book.
Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book.
No, that's not true. The Hebrew Bible is made up of a bunch of different texts, and they were written over a period of time that is about 500 years. And prior to that, there were many books that were written. It's what he's saying is it's factually untrue. There's no, I'm like over explaining. It's just not true.
And for a while, literally, there was only one book, and that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus, but we were starting to aggregate written text together, and it went through all sorts of technological transformations, and then it became books that everybody could buy, the book everybody could buy, and the first one of those was the Bible, and then it became all sorts of books that everybody could buy. But all those books, in some sense, emerged out of that underlying book. And that book itself, the Bible isn't a book, it's a library.
Now, there's actually almost nothing to fact check there. The writings on papyrus, those were the books of the time. So to say that because it was on papyrus, they're not really books, it ignores the reality of the times. Not all future books emerged from the Bible either. Like the Odyssey was written in the 8th century BCE. That didn't emerge from the Bible. Most of the Iliad is older than the Bible. That's a book, whether it was written on papyrus or not. And then there's this sort of last thing he says here.
The Bible isn't a book, it's a library.
The Bible isn't a book, it's a library.
It's a collection of books.
Okay. It's not really clear what he means by that. The Bible is a book made up of different passages written at different times and assembled together. It's a pretty vague statement. And as the culmination of everything else that he said that's straight up wrong, it's not really worth much one way or the other to say the Bible is a library. It's not just that if it sounds like a word salad, we're not smart enough to understand it. To all the people emailing me, insisting me how right he is wrong. He is wrong. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't mean everything he says is wrong, but he's completely wrong about just about everything he said in that clip. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at @dpacman. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpacman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpacman.com. We depend on you here at the David Pakman Show. And after we were brutally attacked by Alex Jones, it is even more important that you grab those memberships at joinpacman.com. One of the great member benefits is the bonus show. And Alex Jones yesterday attacking the bonus show. Now, that bonus show is award-winning. Awards we give out, sure. But now it is not only award-winning, but it's also been absolutely brutalized by Alex Jones. You can find out why he's so mad about the bonus show by signing up at joinpacman.com, and you can use the coupon code WOW22 to get a discount from the membership of your choice. All right, there's something very interesting happening within the Republican Party, as we've talked about before, and that is this growing civil war, not only between anti-Trump and pro-Trump Republicans, but as I've said before now a couple of times, between formerly pro-Trump Republicans and pro-Trump Republicans. And Donald Trump has now shown us the pinnacle of his vindictive nature, his rage at anyone who might levy even the mildest criticism against him. He has completely turned on Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, let's kind of build up to it. The context here is that Donald Trump has now floated that he might pardon January 6th rioters if he becomes president again in 2024. So here is Trump saying that for the first time at his rally in Conroe, Texas over the weekend. Here's a reminder.
So many people have been asking me about it. If I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly.
So after that, which is a dangerous, outrageous statement, after that, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham appeared in a TV interview. Lindsey Graham is a longtime friend of Trump's. Lindsey Graham is a guy who played golf with Trump regularly during the presidency, got along, to whatever degree Trump has friends, Lindsey Graham would be considered or would have been considered a friend of Donald Trump. And Lindsey Graham says it's completely inappropriate to do that. And it seems like it sort of might be encouraging the exact type of violent destruction of the Capitol that we saw on January 6th. Here is Lindsey responding to Donald Trump talking about pardons.
Pardons? Do you agree?
Yeah. No, I don't want to send any signal that it was okay to defile the Capitol. There are other groups with causes that may want to go down the violent path if these people get pardoned.
But isn't that a dangerous thing to say?
Harris, well, I think it's inappropriate. I don't want to reinforce that defiling the Capitol was okay.
Okay, so Trump is asked about this during a Newsmax interview yesterday with Rob Schmidt, and he completely turns on Lindsey Graham. He calls Lindsey Graham a rhino, meaning a Republican in name only. And you really see here this disloyal, vindictive Trump that is the guy we know exists, obviously. But here it's coming up with a guy who was, in theory, a friend of Donald Trump's. Take a look.
You talked about the potential, if it's appropriate, of pardoning some of the January 6ers.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham said a couple days later he thinks that's inappropriate. What do you think?
Well, Lindsey Graham's wrong. I mean, Lindsey's a nice guy, but he's a rhino. Lindsey's wrong. Look.
This is really the kind of bottom of the barrel, disloyal Trump. There's no loyalty for Trump. His best friends, again, to the extent he has real friends, and I don't know if he does. Trump's relationships with people, including his own family, are very, very strange. His friends are immediately enemies if they say just one wrong thing. Graham is just the latest victim here. Trump going on to talk about how many of the rioters are not even guilty. He says that they're patriots, some of them. They're not guilty of crimes. And says Lindsey Graham doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And this is notable for a couple of reasons, which we'll talk about in a moment.
And some of these people are not guilty. Many of these people are not guilty. What they've done to these, and in many cases, patriots, they're soldiers, they're policemen, what they've done to them compared to what they've done to the other side.
Now, by the way, the fact that sometimes they're soldiers and policemen, that's an aggravating factor. These are folks that we should be saying, wow, if soldiers and policemen are so deluded that they're doing this, it's not even about criminality. We should be questioning whether they should be soldiers and policemen. For Trump, it's, they're soldiers and policemen. They just shouldn't even be charged, I guess.
You have to have equal justice, and this isn't equal.
No.
So I would absolutely be prepared. And Lindsey Graham doesn't know what the hell he's talking about if he says that, because You have to have equal justice. It's very, very unfair what's happened to this group of people.
Now, if you claim to be for law and order and due process, how can you say someone is not guilty before their case has even been adjudicated by the legal system? They don't care about any of their principles. How many times have I said this now? They're about law and order when it's convenient. They're about due process when it's convenient. Prisons and jails are places where we don't have to concern ourselves with conditions when it's not their people who are there. Now, all of a sudden, Trump and others are saying the conditions in jail that these people are being held in are terrible. We've been talking about that for decades. We've been talking about it for decades. And then the attacks on the issue of sentences comes up again here. And Trump saying, restating that he is up for giving pardons.
Some of them are being treated very unfairly. Yeah, I would absolutely give them a pardon
The
if
punishments
things
are
don't work out fairly.
Punishments are out of proportion to the crime.
Out of proportion, like 20 times out of proportion.
Yeah, I mean, if they're patriots, the way Donald Trump said, why on earth would they get any punishment? So this is extraordinarily dangerous. And this is a hallmark of the fascist dictator, the dictator wannabe, the authoritarian, and the autocrat, right? Wherever you want on that scale. Friend of the show, former guest, fellow Argentinian Federico Finkelstein has been tweeting a lot about this. When law and order don't work for you, what authoritarians and fascist dictators do is they impose their will instead of law and order. And that's what Trump is saying here. You've got to do everything right. You can come to the country, but you got to do it legally. Everything just legally the way the law says. Well, here we have people who are being subjected to what the law says. No. My will that these are patriots is what now matters. And I will pardon them if given the opportunity. It doesn't even matter whether he really would pardon them. It's impossible to know that at this point in time. One last clip from this interview. Here is the reporter. I mean, this guy should really be blushing from this interview. Here's the reporter, Rob Schmidt, sort of praying at the altar of Trump and saying, you could be having such a great life, but instead you want to be president again. It's truly unbelievable.
That has got to do stuff as much as you do. I mean, most people by your age just want to relax. You want to go back into
what a hero. Instead of just relaxing, Trump wants to go back in.
War zone. I mean, you're flirting with it right now. You're not going to announce, and I understand that. But to go back into there, I think people would have to say you're crazy.
Very simple reason. We have a great country that's going to hell, and it's going to hell very fast. And we're not going to have a country left. And
this is the same rhetoric from 2016. We're not going to have a country.
Great job. I did more than most presidents would do in 30 years between the taxes and
more damage, right?
And the regulations and the business and everything else.
He did the business. I mean, think about how meaningless these things are. He did the taxes. Okay, yes, there was a tax bill passed. He did the regulations of no meaning, and he did the business.
Then we got hit with the COVID from China, and they got to pay something for that. They're going to pay something. Nobody could afford. It's probably $60 trillion worldwide.
Anyway, I won't subject you to more of it, but a truly delusional interview showing us the vindictive nature of Trump, the childish and jealous nature of Trump, and also his complete and total willingness to do absolutely anything in complete abandonment of his stated principles, in this case, law, order, and due process, when it doesn't work out the way he wants it to work out. Extremely dangerous stuff. All right, one more Trump thing before we move on to other things. Donald Trump published a statement yesterday in which he demands that Mike Pence actually be investigated for not stealing the election. Now, there's a really great article in Vanity Fair from Bess Levin about this, where she describes she describes Trump's statement as febrile and grammatically offensive, which is maybe the best way to describe any Trump statement that I've ever heard. And we're going to look at that statement in a moment. I encourage you to actually read the article by Bess Levin in Vanity Fair. But the point here is that not only is Trump saying he wanted Pence to overturn the election, and we've learned more about this in the last 48 hours. He actually thinks maybe there should even be an investigation into Pence. So here is the statement put out by Donald Trump yesterday. And again, it reads like one of these tweets, and there's random capitalization and all sorts of different things. Quote, "So pathetic to watch the unselect committee of political hacks, liars, and traitors work so feverishly to alter the Electoral College Act so that a vice president cannot ensure the honest results of the election, when just 1 year ago, they said the vice president has absolutely no right to ensure the true outcome or results of an election." In other words, they lied. And the vice president did have this right, or more pointedly, could have sent the votes back to various legislators for reassessment after so much fraud and irregularities were found. Now, that's not true. We looked already at the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Vote Act, I believe it's called, of 1887. I think I'm now not remembering the year. I think it's 1887. We looked at this earlier in the week. It's already clear to 99.9% of people that Mike Pence can't overturn the election or do the things Trump wanted him to do. The reason that now the language is considering being updated is specifically because of bad actors like Trump, who are either deliberately or out of ignorance misunderstanding what the powers of the vice president are in counting electoral votes. OK, back to the statement as it gets even crazier. If it were sent back to the legislators, or if Nancy Pelosi, who is in charge of Capitol security, had taken my recommendation and substantially increased security, that's a lie, by the way, there would have been no January 6th as we know it. Now, it's fascinating to see Trump say, on the one hand, the rioters are being treated unfairly, and he'll give pardons to some of them, and the sentences are unfair, while at the same time saying Nancy Pelosi upping security could have prevented it. If they didn't do anything wrong and they're being treated unfairly and being punished when they shouldn't be punished, why is it we needed? Why would security need to stop people from doing something that wasn't a problem? It's completely incoherent, as you can tell. And then Trump going on to say, therefore, and this is like the key whacked out line, therefore, the Unselect Committee should be investigating why Nancy Pelosi did such a poor job of overseeing security and why Mike Pence did not send back the votes for recertification or approval, in that it has now been shown that he clearly had the right to do so. Trump is out of his mind. This is, I mean, this is officially losing it. It's also sort of a partial walkback of his previous statement. The previous statement was Pence could have overturned it. He seems to be walking it back by saying what Pence could and should have done is send it back to the states for recertification. Pence also can't do that, but it is a walkback of that original statement, which was even more unhinged. But the theme here is it's always someone else's responsibility and someone else's fault. Pence is to blame. Pelosi's to blame. Brad Raffensperger is to blame. Joe Biden, whoever, people who allowed voting by mail. It's never, I'm to blame because I didn't get enough votes. I didn't convince enough people to vote for me. That's never the explanation. And I saw a funny comment on Reddit about this sort of like faux mirage alpha male status of Donald Trump. And it read, what kind of person listens to him and says, yes, this is the big, strong man, as opposed to this is what it sounds like when my child loses a video game. And this is completely over the top and beyond the pale. And this is the world of a narcissist. We've spoken to psychologists and others before. Everything is someone else's fault. Trump blames others for losing the election. Trump blames others for not fulfilling what he believed or asked them to do in terms of overturning the election. And at the end of the day, this will never change. When you are this deluded and narcissistic, this is how everything is seen through this lens. We'll have some of these statements and clips that we looked at in this segment on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Super interesting new polling out of Florida that I want to talk about, and it's looking better and better for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and it's looking worse and worse for the former President Donald Trump. When we look at Florida favorability, Trump is way down and DeSantis is doing very well. And this is relevant for a few different reasons, which we're going to talk about. But top level, when we look at the Republican field for 2024 right now, there's really two names being mentioned. It's Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And of course, there's all of these other discussions about what about Republicans going back to someone like a Mitt Romney, who I don't think is even remotely interested in it, or whatever else. Those are all perfectly reasonable discussions. Or some people saying, what about Don Jr., which I think is idiotic, but plausible given the Republican electorate or whatever else. But right now, we're talking about Trump DeSantis, and that's exactly why Florida is so important. So let's take a look at the numbers. A new poll has Biden losing to DeSantis and Trump in Florida, but that's not super interesting to me right now. That's going to be impacted much more by what Biden does. New poll, this is USA Today. New poll says Joe Biden is struggling in Florida, where more than half of potential voters disapprove of his handling of the economy and of his job overall. Suffolk University USA Today network poll of likely Florida voters suggests only 39% approve of Joe Biden's job, 53% disapprove. While President Trump won Florida in 2020, Biden and the Democrats hope to make a big play for the nation's third most populous state, one that will have 30 electoral votes in 2024. The new poll indicates their work is cut out for them. The most important numbers here are, and I am trying to find them. Where exactly are they? The new poll. DeSantis, the first-term governor, leads. Oh no, this is the Florida. So let's actually get to the right data. Okay. Many Republicans see DeSantis as a potential presidential candidate in 24, but the new poll has him losing a Republican primary, 47-40 to Donald Trump. The poll has both Trump and DeSantis defeating Biden or Clinton in a general election matchup in Florida. DeSantis leads Biden 52-44. Trump's margin over Biden is closer, 47-44. So DeSantis is doing better than Trump against Biden in the state of Florida. DeSantis has not publicly disclosed a run. Of course, anything could change, and it's very, very early. Now, it's easy to write this off and say, David, this is just a Florida poll. This is not a national poll. And DeSantis is the governor of Florida. Of course, he's going to do well. But that's exactly why it matters, because it's Florida and because Florida is likely to be so important in upcoming elections. Now, there's so much still to happen, including the 2022 midterms, before we get into any even remotely specific conversation about 2024. But there's a very clear trend when you look at all of the CPAC straw polls that we've recently seen, Republican favorability polls, open-ended questions about who would you like to see run. The trends are as follows. Trump favorability has been declining. Percentage of Republicans who want Trump to run in 24 has been declining. It's now barely over half of Republicans, as we talked about earlier this week, want Trump to run in 2024. And when we talk about who other than Trump is being mentioned, the only person with any remotely significant level of support is Ron DeSantis. This is another reason why I should mention Ron DeSantis's reelection campaign going on right now is so important. Could Ron DeSantis lose reelection in November and still run in 2024 successfully? Yes, he could. He could. But it is much more likely that Republican voters would support the guy who won re-election in 22 than the guy who lost it. And this just has to do with the idea of, supporting a loser for some bigger office when they lost their last election. Has it happened? Of course it has. Of course it has. But this is another reason why if we could knock out DeSantis, it would make it an even bigger uphill battle for him in 24. And the reason why I say that is you might be saying, well, but David, what do you want Trump? No, the issue is DeSantis is a less incompetent but just as dangerous version of Trump, in my mind. And the fact that he's less cartoonish but has the same disastrous political instincts, in my mind, would make him more effective at being able to destroy the country. So I see DeSantis as more dangerous than Trump for that reason. We're going to continue following the numbers, and we're going to continue following the Republican Civil War. By the way, actually, speaking of the Republican Civil War, George W. Bush has maxed out his donations to 2 anti-Trump Republicans who supported the impeachment of Donald Trump. I'm talking about Liz Cheney, yes, the daughter of Bush's former VP, and Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski. Now, let me give you the facts first, but don't assume what I think is important about this story, because it's not George W. Bush is a good guy. Business Insider reporting, George W. Bush maxes out political donations to Trump impeachment supporters Liz Cheney and Lisa Murkowski. Okay. Former President George W. Bush gave the maximum allowed political contributions to Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney and Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, 2 Republicans who supported impeaching Trump over the January 6th Capitol riot. New disclosures filed with the FEC said Bush gave Cheney $5,800 on October 28th, and on December 31st, he gave Murkowski $2,900 for her primary. The FEC sets the limits on political contributions. The story here is not, and this is a key thing, the story here is not, Bush is a great guy, we should elect people like Bush, we should elect people like Liz Cheney and Lisa Murkowski, we should rehabilitate George W. Bush's image now that he's painting and doesn't like Trump. No, that is not the story. And it's a very unfortunate thing. And I don't know to what degree they're cynically doing it and to what degree they're honestly doing it. There are some on the left who love to take stories like this one that I'm doing and say, look at these faux leftists who now love Bush despite him being a disastrous war criminal and getting us into these 2 wars. No, the story here is not what a great guy George W. Bush is. The story here is the Republican Civil War is maybe the best chance the left has to help itself, because the left is increasingly unable to help itself in any other way. That's all this is. I am not optimistic about the left in the United States, by which I mean the most left elements of the Democratic Party, which at this point is the one even possible vehicle for the left to do anything in the U.S. I don't have any confidence that in 2022 and 2024, Democrats / leftists are well positioned and prepared to get anything done. And so I'm hoping Republicans will help us. That's all this is. And the more Republicans are divided, the more potential there is for an opportunity to defeat them and to prevent them from taking the House, the Senate, the White House over the next 2 election cycles. Let's not forget that every single Republican elected official that supported impeachment is now participating in the obstruction of letting Joe Biden do anything. These are not good people. And even if they don't like Trump, their obstruction of Biden may well help Donald Trump get reelected in 3 years. So it's okay to recognize Trump was more incompetent than George W. Bush and still not like George W. Bush, and recognize that Bush donating to these Republicans might foment the Republican Civil War to our advantage. We can do all of these things. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. At least some of us can. There's this impulse by some, maybe, to sweep George W. Bush's disastrous misdeeds under the rug because he's painting pictures and sharing a cough drop with Michelle Obama and donating to anti-Trump Republicans. But he was not a good president. His increase of the powers of the presidency are probably to some degree responsible for allowing some of Donald Trump's worst abuses when he was president. Bush got us into some of the longest wars in American history, one based on a phony intelligence case that he sent Colin Powell to make. He expanded torture. We're not praising Bush. And that's the end of it. And this is how most people would behave. You know, When you attack someone's family or them the way Donald Trump did to George W. Bush for years, it's normal that George W. Bush would say, I'm going to donate to the people that are against this guy. It's just totally reasonable. Ted Cruz did the opposite. Donald Trump called Ted Cruz's wife ugly. And then Ted Cruz fell in line and said, Trump's amazing. He's fantastic. He's great. We love him. We love Trump. Most people wouldn't do that. Most people would do what George W. Bush is doing. It doesn't make him a hero, and it doesn't make him someone we align with politically. Period. Full stop. End of story. Let's follow this Republican Civil War and see to what degree it can be useful to the left to try to get some wins or at least prevent some losses in the next 2 election cycles. Follow us on social media. Interact with the David Pakman Show community. See exclusive content. See when we're taking calls live. And stay up to date on other big show announcements. We post daily. Find us on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and TikTok. All right, a couple of newsworthy items that I want to touch on. The Trump records that have been sent to the Riot Committee, the January 6th Riot Investigative Committee of the House of Representatives, some of those records were torn up and taped back together. And this is an MO that we're already familiar with the Trump organization and administration. The Washington Post reporting some records sent to the January 6th committee were torn up, taped back together, mirroring a Trump habit. When the National Archives and Records Administration handed over a trove of documents to the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection, some of the Trump White House records had been ripped up and then taped back together, according to 3 people familiar with the records. Former President Trump was known inside the White House for his unusual and politically unlawful habit of tearing presidential records into shreds and tossing them on the floor, creating a headache for records management analysts who meticulously used Scotch tape to piece together fragments of paper that were sometimes as small as confetti, as Politico reported in 2018. But despite the Presidential Records Act, which requires the preservation of memos, letters, notes, emails, faxes, and other written communications related to a president's official duties, the former president's infrangible shredding practices apparently continued well into the latter stages of his presidency. The National Archives on Monday took the unusual step of confirming the habit, saying in a statement that records turned over from the Trump White House, quote, included paper records that had been torn up by former President Trump. The statement comes in response to a question from the Washington Post about whether some January 6th related records had been ripped up and taped back together. This is about 700 pages of documents transmitted to the January 6th committee last month. Now, you might remember that not only ripping up documents is something Donald Trump would frequently do. There are claims that Trump ate documents. This is crazy, but we reported on it back in 2018, and it's all part of the same thing. Newsweek report, Trump ate sensitive document after Cohen meeting, former White House aide claims. Former White House aide Omarosa Manigault Newman has said she walked in on President Donald Trump eating paper after a meeting with lawyer Michael Cohen. This is so insane. And what she believed was an effort to destroy sensitive information. This was from her book, Unhinged, an insider account of the Trump White House. Newman makes a series of disturbing and amusing allegations about the president's conduct. Newman recalls, I saw him put a note in his mouth. Since Trump was ever the germaphobe, I was shocked. He appeared to be chewing and swallowing the paper. It must have been something very, very sensitive. So listen, whether Trump ate notes or not, there's no doubt at all, like even if Omarosa's lying, there's no doubt whatsoever that the ripping up of the notes was a common thing. We reported at the time that there was like a team of a couple people that their job was to pick up confetti-sized pieces of paper and tape them back together to remain in compliance with presidential records and the like. And of course, this is not the behavior of an innocent person. And when it comes to records about what happened in the lead up to and the immediate aftermath of the January 6th Trump riots, Why would he be ripping those up? And of course, innocent until proven guilty, all of that stuff. But this show is not a court of law. It's a court of opinion, my opinion. And it is not, in my opinion, the behavior of an innocent person. Last thought on this. I don't have to remind you that just about every promise that was made by Donald Trump leading up to his administration was a lie or it didn't come true. One of those claims was we will be the most transparent administration ever. Remember that Trump had one press secretary who held 0 or 1 briefings in her entire tenure. It was a relatively short tenure, I admit. And also remember that Trump ran on Hillary can't be trusted and is not transparent. Hillary's hiding emails. Hillary deleted email. Hillary used private email. Hillary can't be trusted with sensitive information. Hillary can't be trusted with classified information. And it all happened during the Trump administration. Trump spilling secrets that were received from ally Israel to a Russian spy recruiter in the Oval Office. Remember that one? Ivanka, Jared, the whole team using private email throughout their work for Donald Trump in the administration, and on and on and on. So there's 5 or 6 stories here. And shockingly, the one of Trump eating notes is not even the craziest or more dangerous one. Okay, last thing on, again, every day we are learning more about the insanity that took place in the aftermath of the November election and in the lead up to the January 6th riots. By now, you have no doubt heard, if you've been watching my show, listening to the podcast over the last year, all of the different ways in which they were trying to get a hold of the fact that Joe Biden won the election and that they wanted to try to overturn it. We've talked about 63 court filings, all of which were found to be without merit. Some were found where there was no standing, and many of them found to be without merit. We've learned about, Mike Pence is going to flip the election somehow. Either by something he does himself or by sending it back to the states or, whatever the case may be. We also heard about declaring a national emergency / martial law. And there was this idea of seizing the voting machines. Now, what you do with the voting machines once you seize them to flip results, we can speculate. We don't exactly know. But we now have reason to believe that Donald Trump himself, who's shocked by this? Donald Trump himself was much more involved than previously known in the plan to seize those voting machines. The New York Times breaking the story this week. Trump had role in weighing proposals to seize voting machines. New accounts show that the former president was more directly involved than previously known in plans developed by outside advisors to use national security agencies to seek evidence of fraud. 6 weeks after Election Day, with his hold on power slipping, Trump directed Giuliani to make a remarkable call. Trump wanted him to ask DHS if it could legally take control of voting machines in key swing states, 3 people familiar with the matter said. Remember that Giuliani did so, calling the department's acting deputy secretary, who said he lacked the authority to audit or impound the machines. Trump pressed Giuliani to make the inquiry after rejecting a separate effort by his outside advisors to have the Pentagon take control of the machines. And the outreach to the Department of Homeland Security came not long after Trump, in an Oval Office meeting with then Attorney General William Barr, raised the possibility of whether the Justice Department could seize the machines, a previously undisclosed suggestion that Mr. Barr immediately shot down. The new accounts show that Trump was more directly involved than previously known in exploring these proposals to seize voting machines, as he grasped unsuccessfully for evidence of fraud that could help him reverse the 2020 election. Right now, everyone's attention is focused on the coup and on election fraud, and that makes sense. But look at how much we've learned just about that, and then imagine for a moment how much other crazy stuff was going on that we still don't know anything about, that will likely be uncovered about the last 4 years. It will probably take, conservatively, another 4 years to figure all of that out. And it could even take closer to 8 to 10 years for it all to shake out in terms of its repercussions. It's very clear that they did attempt a coup, but they seemed not that competent at it. They seemed as competent at doing the coup as they were at governing when Donald Trump was president. And it failed and it became a sideshow, but we can't write it off and not worry because, as I said earlier, DeSantis is a more competent Trump, and that makes him more dangerous. And these same techniques now with the experience of 2020, knowing where the holdups were, knowing where it ended up stalling, with a more competent person at the helm could be a very dangerous proposition. And we've heard from retired military generals who say if Trump had had the generals on his side, could have been a very different outcome. We've heard about if there had been more willingness in the House and particularly the Senate to attempt to reject or challenge some of the results in a more serious way in multiple states, it could have been a different outcome. Now, one more thought about this Trump role in trying to seize voting machines. Remember when William Barr quit seemingly out of the blue as Attorney General on December 23rd? December 23rd was the date of William Barr's resignation letter. Did William Barr see the writing on the wall about what was coming on January 6th? Maybe not specifically, but knowing this is potentially bad and I don't want to be associated with it. And that's why he abruptly quit. Because if you consider the timing, the meetings where the idea of a national emergency was floated, the meetings where the question about can we seize the voting machines, all of this stuff happened between the November election and December 23rd when William Barr quit. And it seems plausible, at least, that Barr knew or suspected that something insane was coming and decided to get the hell out of there before it did. Doesn't make Barr any better of an attorney general. It's just Barr acting out of self-interest. The timing makes sense. At some point, maybe we'll know for sure. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I am really, really, really regretting something I did on the show. 2 weeks ago now, someone said, David, if you had to leave the country, where would you go? I have no plan to leave the country. I don't think it's going to be necessary to leave the country, but I answered the question anyway. And I said, well, I could go back to Argentina anytime because I was born there. So I can go anytime. As a Jewish individual, I could go to Israel at any time. I'm working on getting European citizenship through my grandfather who fled Poland before war, but I'm not planning to do any. Okay. The number of messages I have received now from people saying, David, I'm canceling my membership because I don't want to be with someone who's going to abandon us if the going gets tough, all these different things. I regret even talking about it. And now this is sort of the height of it. This caller said, David, you planning to leave makes you seem like the unpatriotic Jew who will take his capital and leave with no loyalty. We've gotten to the anti-Semitic tropes part of the leaving the country timeline. Take a listen to this.
Hey, Dave, my name is Jeff, and I'm calling about your recent segments reference you leaving the United States if things go authoritarian.
Yeah.
That raises a couple of concerns, I think, that were borne out in Alex Jones's response to those videos. The first concern is that it reinforces the trope that Jews aren't really patriotic or good citizens in here. You know, you're saying if things get bad enough, you'll leave. The second concern is it promotes the trope that, you know, Jews are a global set who will pick up their capital and split, look for better markets at the first sort of trouble. I'm saying this as a guy who by right may go to Israel or may go to Spain, but I won't go to either one of those places except and only if I'm a tourist. If things get bad here, it's only because we let them get bad.
Guys, I'm not leaving. In a true dystopia, the likes of which I was imagining when I answered the question, we would all be looking to leave. There wouldn't be any more tourism. It would be an emergency. We would all be looking for safe haven. Me being Jewish wouldn't change that. This was a question asked by the audience. If you were to leave because things got so bad, where would you go? And it's true. If I left, I'm not going to go to Thailand or Norway, where I both don't speak the language and have no way to actually go to legally. If I left, I would be more likely to go to Argentina because I was born there, or to Israel for legal reasons. But I'm not planning on leaving. And it was clearly a very big mistake to even entertain the question. What a disaster. On today's bonus show, we will talk about a massive winter storm coming that will stretch 2,000 miles. It is going to hit areas that don't typically have winter storms and are much less prepared and have disastrous infrastructure. Are we looking at another potential episode of what happened in Texas with electricity in a bunch of states because this storm is so widespread? And if so, what are Republicans going to say about infrastructure? Hope it doesn't happen. We'll talk about it on today's bonus show. We will also talk about the big headline among many on the right that for the first time ever, America's national debt has surpassed $30 trillion. What does it actually mean without hyperbole? We will talk about it. And lastly, their jury deliberations have started in the Roy Moore defamation case. You might have, we talked about this case a long time ago. You might have forgotten about it. Jury deliberations have started, and we're going to talk about what's at stake there. All of those stories and more, I am told, on today's bonus show. We will be, I'm told there's something going on for my birthday on today's bonus show. I don't know what it is. I'm as curious as you are. Join it, joinpacman.com. Get instant access, and we will see you on the bonus show or otherwise tomorrow.